Hi Year 11, so today we are going to be looking at attitudes. So when we are looking at attitudes, the first thing we need to look at is attribution, so how we actually explain our behaviour. So why do we fall in love with some people but not others? Why do some people succeed and others fail? Right? How do we actually make sense of our world? How do we understand other people's behaviours? And what reasons and explanations actually help us to understand other people? So attribution is the process by which people explain the causes of their own and other people's behaviour. Our explanations can be grouped together in two categories, personal and situational. So personal attribution is an explanation due to characteristics of the person. For example, if Mario lost his job because he did not tell his boss about his leave, we may think it's because he is unreliable. We are attributing his behaviour to characteristics. However, if we learn that his behaviour occurred because his wife was ill in hospital and was too stressed to work, we are given a situational attribution. So a situational attribution is an explanation due to factors beyond a person's control. So let's say, for example, with personal attribution, you hear of somebody in the class who has failed the SAC. You may attribute that to the fact that, they're lazy and didn't study. But if it's a situational thing, maybe perhaps, so situational attribution, you could say that the SAC was actually quite hard. So that's why they failed. Although if you've passed, then yeah, come on. Alright, so the fundamental attribution errors. So if you see a new student arguing with a teacher in the schoolyard at lunchtime, you might conclude that the student is rebellious, argumentative, or rude. You might not consider that something in the situation, such as being blamed for rubbish that someone else dropped, caused the behaviour. When explaining behaviour, we tend to focus on the role of the factors associated with the person and underestimate the influence of the situation. So we tend to blame the person more than the situation. And this bias is called the fundamental attribution error. It is a tendency to overestimate the influence of personal factors and underestimate the impact of situational factors. So you're blaming the person for failing the SAC rather than the situation that they're in. For example, maybe they're too stressed about the whole COVID situation to study. And this is usually because the person is usually more noticeable than what the situation is. You have to read more into it to understand the situation. But if you're actually looking at it from the perspective of the person who's right in front of you displaying the behaviour, you're more likely to blame them. So fundamental attribution error is when you blame the person more than you blame the situation. So actor-observer bias. One exception to the fundamental attribution error occurs when explaining our own behaviour. So instead of blaming the person, we blame the situation. So let's say, for example, you're sitting a SAC at the exam at the end of the year, right? And you find out your marks and you find out that you failed. You're more likely to do the reverse and blame the difficulty of the exam rather than the fact that you didn't study, which I know a lot of you aren't doing, which you're never going to watch anyway. Therefore, the actor-observer bias refers to our tendency to attribute our own behaviour to external or situational causes and other behaviour to internal causes. So something that you need to sort of bring out here is the fact that actor-observer bias is the opposite to fundamental attribution error, and it means that we have a tendency to attribute our behaviour over to the situation rather than our own personality or the fact that we didn't study. Alright, so self-serving bias. Self-serving bias is evident when the teacher hands back a test and a student attributes a good result to their ability and hard work or a bad result to their unfair questions or being sick. So this is sort of like a selfish sort of thing. Let's say, for example, I've given you a SAC back and you happen to get 98%. You go, oh, I got 98% because I'm so great. But if you happen to get a poor result, you might say, I got a poor result, not because I didn't study, but because Miss Irving's so mean. So when judging ourselves, we tend to take the credit for our successes and attribute any failures to somebody else or to the situation. So one explanation of this bias is that we are motivated by a desire to protect our self-esteem. So we're trying to do it to protect ourselves. We don't want to admit that we've done something wrong. We would rather blame something else to actually get through it. So our attitudes are learned through experience, and that's very important to note. It's learned through experiences. Everything we do is learned through experience. They reflect our unique experiences as individuals as well as our social cultural background. As we interact with different individuals and groups, as we expose to various kinds of media and life in general, we form attitudes, are influenced by them, display them to others, argue about them, and sometimes change them. Attitudes can be viewed as ideas that we hold about ourselves, others, objects, and experiences. So we tend to learn them based on who we meet, the experiences we have, and this changes throughout our life. So the term attitude can be defined in many different ways, but contemporary psychologists commonly define an attitude as an evaluation a person makes about an object, person, group, or issue. Now we're just going to have a look at that one. So an attitude is an evaluation, and it's very important that you include that word, right? It's an evaluation about an object, person, group, event, or issue. So it's not just about an object or an issue, it's about all of them. So when you're defining it, you must have all of that. So you may want to highlight that section. So attitudes are a learned idea about ourselves, others, objects, or experience. Attitudes are learned, affected by experience, and affected by the media. Alright, so we can form attitudes towards pretty much anything. Ferris wheels, computers, because they're objects, right? Ourselves and politicians. What do you think about Trump? Our friendship group. What do you think about your friends? What do you think about Greenpeace or PETA or any of those? Easter and elections. Do you think we should continue to have Easter? There is some talk that we get rid of it. Elections. Should we be forced to vote in Australia? Euthanasia. Should that be allowed? And global warming. So you can have an attitude about anything and everything. And like a few other things, it's always down to the tri-component model. So the tri-component model of attitudes proposes that any attitude has three related components referred to as the ABCs of attitudes. So A, the affective, our emotional reactions or feelings. And just so we're clear, affective, not effective. You do lose marks, and it's marked wrong if you write effective. B, behavioural, our actions. C, cognitive, our beliefs. So you may want to highlight that section there and the heading, so the tri-component model of attitudes. So the affective is our emotions, behaviours are our actions, cognitive is our beliefs or thoughts about it. So the model proposes that all three components must be present before it can be said that an attitude exists. So all three must be present, right, before you can say that an attitude exists. So let's say, for example, I have an opinion about, okay, let's go with COVID. COVID, you all know. All right, so let's go with COVID. My feelings and emotions about COVID is the fact that I'm a little bit scared about it. My dad's in hospital because of it. So my emotional reactions are, one of fear. So that's the affective. Behavioural, because I know the effects and I've seen it firsthand, right? My actions are to stay home and stay away from you as much as possible. Cognitive, our beliefs. I think that, our beliefs, let's say, I think that those people that aren't wearing masks and those people that are risking people's lives because they believe, oh, it's my body, my choice, are risking the lives of others. Right? Dad did everything correct and he still got it because somebody else didn't follow the rules. And they knew they had it, and they went out and gave it to him anyway. We won't discuss that. So, you can have consistent and inconsistent attitudes. A consistent component is when you have all three. So, let's say, for example, you have the affective, the behavioural, and the cognitive, and they all match. So you might avoid a spider, behavioural, because you were scared of spiders, affective, and you believe that spiders can harm you, so cognitive. So it's consistent. Your thoughts, feelings, and behaviours all match. You might feel good about going to school, affective, work hard in and out of class, behavioural, because you believe that good grades are required for university. They match. An inconsistent component, a person hates pumpkin soup, so that's the affective. That's how they feel about it. But eats it when staying at a friend's house, behavioural, because the person believes it's a polite thing to do. So the tri-component model doesn't match. Their beliefs or their feelings about it do not match their behaviours. Same thing, a person may dislike watching Test cricket, affective, because they believe it takes too long for a result, cognitive, but they choose to go to a match because their friends are going, behavioural. So it's not matching, so that's inconsistent. A consistent means that all three of them match. You feel about, you have a feeling about something, so you do that thing associated with that feeling because you believe you should. Inconsistent is where they don't match on one or more characteristics. Alright, so one of the activities you can do is comment on whether the following words involve affective, behavioural, or cognitive component of an attitude. So work out which one's affective, which one's behavioural, which one's cognitive. And you may want to do that in your own time or pause the video right now. You may want to comment on the affective, behavioural, and cognitive components of the following scenario. VCE students are young adults and therefore should not have to bring a note when absent from school. I resent being treated like a child. I would recommend strongly that you go through these and do them because you need to know the tri-component model, especially for the upcoming SAC. So go through those. There's 3 of them there. Make sure you do them. Alright. You may also want to watch the following videos. You'll be able to find the videos on online and in the actual PowerPoint that I provide for you. So you are to comment on the attitudes that are being expressed in the commercials. Remember, an attitude can be viewed as an idea that we hold about ourselves, others, objects, and experiences that we can form an attitude towards anything. Once you've commented on the attitude being expressed, reflect on whether this attitude is still being held in society in general today. Alright, with attitudes and behaviour, the strength is important. So a strong attitude is an attitude that is usually thought about, well known, and easily accessible. It is something that you don't need to think about, you just have this attitude. Right? It tends to be personally relevant and has some sort of emotional connection to you. So the stronger the attitude, the more likely it is that it will be stable and consistent over time. It will also be resistant to change and influence behaviour. So I'm going to go back to COVID, right? My attitude on this is very strong. I don't think it's going to change. It's going to be consistent over time. You do not want COVID, trust me. I've seen it. It sucks, especially if you get the worst of the worst. Be resistant to change. It's not going to change anytime soon. And I am less likely to go out now that I've seen it firsthand than I've ever been. So stronger attitudes are more likely to predict behaviour than weaker attitudes. For example, though people who have long believed with great confidence that boat people, we won't even discuss that, should be allowed to arrive in Australian shores, is more likely to do something that demonstrates their attitude, such as protesting. Now, we have some people that believe that, you know, COVID isn't real, blah, 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 but there is a good chance that that attitude may disappear pretty quickly when they contract it. We're also more likely to hold strong attitudes when we are surrounded by like-minded people who are important to us. So if you happen to have a family who strongly believes that, I don't know, the world is flat. Let's go with flat earthers. If your family believes it, you're more likely to believe it. And the stronger their attitude, the stronger your attitude is going to be. It's just the way it is. Accessibility. So an accessible attitude is a strong attitude that easily comes to mind. It has been thought about, is well known, and has been stored in memory ready for use. So in other words, right, it easily comes to mind. You don't need to think about it. The strength is how much you believe it and how much you're willing to follow it. Accessibility is pretty much you can think about it straight away without having to put any thought into it, right? For spiders, automatically, whenever I hate spiders, I think they suck, they should all go, but, you know, ecosystem, all that sort of stuff. But every time I see the word spider, or I see a spider, or anything like that, even on TV, I have this urge to look around. And that's because it's accessible to me. I have that fear. Right? So in some cases, accessible attitudes are so closely related to behaviour that they can guide or even predict behaviour. You can be assured that if there is a spider on my desk, I will never ever use that desk again. Ever. The social context. So an American social psychologist have proposed that whether an attitude leads to an actual behaviour may be dependent on the situation in which the person finds themselves. So in some cases, the situation can overpower or the affective and cognitive components of an attitude somebody holds. So you're more likely, at this current point in time, if you're in a hospital, think of all the nurses right now. If you're in a hospital, you are going to believe very, very strongly that COVID exists. Right? You are going to believe it because you are seeing it firsthand. So the situation, the social context, right, is making it impossible for you to deny it. Right? But if you haven't met anyone, or if you, haven't seen anyone who's had it, there's a good chance that you are not going to have a strong attitude about it. It's also illustrated in a situation where a student has a strong, unfavourable and mostly entirely negative beliefs and feelings about a teacher and expresses these openly to friends in the school grounds during recess. However, when encountering that teacher in the classroom, the student smiles and speaks respectfully and politely to the teacher. So you have this attitude in the yard, but you don't dare have it in the classroom, or at least you keep it to yourself, and I'd appreciate it if you did. Perceived control is another one. Attitudes and behaviours are also more likely to match when people perceive that they have control over the behaviour that may be triggered by their attitude. Perceived control is the belief an individual has that they are free to perform or not to perform a behaviour linked to an attitude and belief that they can actually perform this behaviour. So, in other words, you're more likely to have that behaviour if you can actually do something about it, right? There's no point believing that, what's a good example? I'm having a mental mind blank. But either way, you're less likely to have a strong attitude if you have no control over the situation. So let's say, for example, I've got one. Let's say, for example, you really, really, really like soccer, right? You absolutely love it. You want to play it every single day. However, your parents have banned it. They had some sort of issue in the past. They've banned it. You're not allowed to play, right? So you're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to watch it, right? Because you respect your parents, you are not going to go and play soccer because your parents have told you no, and you have no control over whether or not they're going to let you play. So the attitude is going to become weaker. Alrighty, so these are the learning activities you need to do for this task, unless of course something else has been planned, but just in case, here they are.